The King Who Stole. Women, a journey into the darkest Middle Ages. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you are new and leave a like on the video. Now let's start. England, 1199. The bells of Westminster ring out in celebration. A new king has been crowned. It is John, the youngest son of the powerful Henry II and the indomitable Eleanor of Aquitaine, a throne that was never meant for him. Born in Oxford on December 24th, 1166, John was the fifth son of the royal family. So far from the crown that he earned the ironic nickname by which he would go down in history, John Lackland. But fate had other plans. His elder brothers, William, Henry, and Geoffrey, died young. And when Richard the Lionheart also fell, killed by an arrow during the siege of the castle of Chalus in April 1199, the unlikely happened. John became king. The barons watched the scene with bitter irony. The man who should never have reigned now led one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. Yet no one could have imagined that his reign would be marked by devastating losses, by clashes with the nobility, and by scandals that would surpass all standards, even those already low, of the medieval nobility. John was not only a controversial king, but a man whose cruelty and lust were an integral part of his character. Chronicles describe him as a predator. He took the women he desired, even if they were married, often by force. When he ascended the throne, he was already married to Isabella of Gloucester, a distant cousin, a political union, devoid of love, and above all, without heirs. But in 1200, John saw a new opportunity. Isabella d'Angoulême, heiress of a strategic region between Poitou and Gascony. Unfortunately, she was already promised to Hugh X of Lusignan, one of the most powerful nobles in the area. John had no scruples. He annulled his first marriage on an ecclesiastical technicality and married Isabella of Angoulême, who was just 12 years old. He was 33. Some say he was sincerely in love with her. Others, more realistic, speak only of territorial interests. The humiliation inflicted on Hugh X sparked a rebellion that led to the loss of much of England's territory in France. But that was just the beginning. John's reputation as a sexual predator grew rapidly. Rumors told of barons' wives and daughters being seduced or coerced. The monk Roger of Wendover wrote that John dishonored by adultery and fornication the daughters and female relatives of his earls and barons whenever he pleased. The most emblematic case was that of Matilda de Braus, wife of Baron William, once a trusted ally of the king. Matilda, a woman of great strength and intellect, firmly rejected the king's advances, but she paid a very high price. When her husband was accused of treason, Matilda refused to hand over her son as a hostage and publicly denounced the killing at the hands of the king of the young Arthur of Brittany, rival to the throne. John's response was ruthless. He confiscated the family's lands, captured Matilda and her son, and locked them in the fortress of Corfe, where they starved to death. 11 days later, the bodies were found embraced. The boy's face showed signs of bites. Matilda, in desperation, had perhaps tried the impossible to keep them alive. Barbarism shocked the English nobility. Matilda's arbitrary arrest and atrocious death became the symbol of a power out of control. The rebellion of the barons was now inevitable. And in 1215, John was forced to sign the Magna Carta, the first document to formally limit the king's absolute power, establishing that not even the sovereign was above the law. John's predatory behavior toward women continued. He had numerous mistresses and illegitimate children. He treated women like merchandise. He took them, abandoned them. He gave them in marriage to his mercenaries for political favors. A prime example was his lover, Avisa, whom John forced to marry Geoffrey of Mandeville in exchange for an astronomical sum. Many historians today believe that John suffered from a psychological disorder, perhaps a personality disorder, raised as the forgotten son, neglected by Henry II and an absent mother. Giovanni made his way through a world that had not anticipated his success, accumulating grudges, traumas, and desires for revenge. The result was a kingdom marked by paranoia, brutality, and self-destruction. In 1216, suffering from dysentery and abandoned by most of his allies, John died in Newark Castle. There were no great losses. Matthew Paris wrote, "Hell became worse when John Lackland came there. His legacy, one of the worst reputations ever given to an English monarch, not just for the loss of territory and the clash with the church, but for the way he wielded power, with sadism, lust, and contempt for human dignity. His only gift to history was perhaps the Magna Carta, which he did not want to sign and immediately tried to annul, but which served as an eternal warning. No ruler is above the law, and private tyranny often precedes public tyranny. John Lackland, the king who stole other men's women, ended up losing everything: power, respect, and ultimately his kingdom. The story of John Lackland is one of the most dramatic examples of how the abuse of personal power can lead not only to political disaster, but also to moral ruin. His figure emerges from medieval chronicles not only as that of an inept ruler, but as that of a deeply corrupt man, unable to distinguish between his own desires and the good of the kingdom. His greed, his cruelty, and his predatory behavior towards women were not simply private deviations, but concrete manifestations of a distorted authority, exercised with brutality and without restraints. Yet it was precisely through the shadows of his reign that a new principle arose: the idea that the power of the king could be limited, that the law could and should prevail even over the sovereign. The Magna Carta, signed under pressure from an exasperated nobility, was not only a reaction to his failures, but the beginning of a long journey towards the responsibility of power. John remains, 8 centuries later, a controversial and cautionary figure. Not only the king who lost an empire, but the man who, in wanting to possess everything, did not understand that he was losing himself. His story is a warning that spans the centuries. Those who govern without justice end up being remembered, not for the crown they wore, but for the lives they destroyed in trying to maintain it. That's all for today. And what do you think of this king who stole women from others? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. See you next time. Bye.